Now, Uday, first of all, we learned something called Superglobals within the context of form handling, right? So there are a couple of, these are called super global variables. What they mean is in the PHP language, in our script, wherever we are capable of accessing these global variables. They are called super global because they can be accessed from any function, any place, any file in your script, right? Script or in the form of in the context of the web server. Once you have set these variables, initialize those variables to a certain value, you can access it from anywhere, right? So that's the intention of super globals. Now you can see I have out of all of these, I have bolded two, the ones that we will be using today, the $_post and the $_get, right? Now the post and get are not new to you because I have explained to you during the form creation part the two methods that we are going to pass information to the web server. That would be the get method and the post method, right? Now, not only those two methods today, there are a few more other methods as well. Namely, the get method. Basically, the purposes are quite different. If you consider the get method, as its name implies, it's supposed to retrieve information, something like a blog article, something like a YouTube video from a streaming website. You can simply send out a query, a media query, and then basically receive something back in return. And the post is basically there to create new information and then store new information onto the web server, right? That those are the main two intentions of the get and the post methods. But there are other two as well. Put method is basically to replace data, something that is already existing. You can replace it with some new content. Delete is also there. It's something like you can simply delete an article or some sort of an information that is already stored in the web server or else maybe a database server, right? Now here what we will be looking at basically the get method and the post method, right? So if you consider the get method, Uday, here the information is being passed to the web server. Now keep in mind it's about the client and the server. The client being your browser, right, and the server being something like what we run, the Apache server or some sort of a web server, right? So here what we how we pass the information is the interesting part. The data is actually sent in the URL, right? Now usually what we do is from the rather the client, from the client we are sending something known as an HTTP request, right, towards the server, and the server basically taking that request into consideration, it caters to it, and the catering or else how it responds is known as an HTTP response, right? So basically, this is the request that we are making from our client, or which is the web browser, and we are sending it out to basically to the web server, and then the web server will respond, right? So here you can see the information is actually being passed on the URL itself, right? URL stands for Uniform Resource Locator, and query string, that is basically the information that we are passing from the sender to the receiver. Okay, so in this case the sender happens to be your web browser, which is the client, and the receiver happens to be the web server. Here, as I've told you, the information is passed as a part of the URL. So followed by, you can see the login.php part over here. That is your file name, and then followed by a question mark, and then the query string, right? So the query string consists of, see, you can see over here, name1 equals value1. So it's the name of the variable and the value that we are passing on to through the variable, and you can combine more than one value using the ampersand symbol, and then likewise. Okay, so I'll get to that later on how it is actually being passed. So here you can see again another demonstration here. So you have your web browser and we're passing some information. You can see register.asp happens to be our file name, the file name over here. And then there might be certain fields called name, email, likewise. And then you can see job happens to be the value that is passed. And another value for the email. So that is those two values are being passed on to the web server, and the web server will do the needful in order to either to save it or else to say give a feedback to the user, something like that. Okay. So that depends on how the coding is done on the web server's perspective, right? Okay. The next method would be the post method, right? So instead of sending the information or what we are passing to the web server, through the URL, we are actually sending it through the body of the HTTP request. Now, what does the body mean? Is it similar to something like the HTML body section? Yeah, somewhat similar, but it's basically not a web page, but rather a request, a message, right? So the information is actually sent in the message body rather than the URL itself, right? So something like this. So you can see Uday, this is the post request. This is a somewhat simplified version of that. You can see this is the page that we are requesting, tests demo underscore form.php, and then the version of HTTP as well. I'll show you how a request, how the web server logs these information in. And the host is this is where the information is being passed. And then here what happens is this is the body section of the HTTP request. Name 1 equals value 1 and name 2 equals value 2. Okay. So as I've told you, it's not on the URL, but rather on the request body, and that information is being sent to the web server, right? So what are the differences between the get and the post? So based on the intention, the get method is about requesting data from a specific resource. But in the post method, it's about submitting information or data to be processed by a specific resource, right? So it's about saving or processing, sending the information for the purpose of processing or else saving the contents. In the get method, it's about, the initial request that you need to get some information, right? So the get method, the data is submitted as a part of the URL, as I've told you, and then in the post method, the data is submitted in the request body. So we saw that earlier. The data in the get method is less secured but faster. Why is it less secured? Because even passwords and all that information what you send is clearly visible in the form of a plain text in the URL of the request, right? So basically, it's not secure because you can see all the information that is being passed, right? But in the post method, like the information is never visible to intermediaries, but simply based on your like input to the form, the information will be, the request will be generated and it will be visible to the web server, right? But it's not clearly plainly visible to anyone who basically looks at the website on the URL. Can be cached by the browser because since they are URLs, they can be saved so that the same information can be sent over and over again later on by the cache of the browser. The post method, you can't cache it because it has nothing to do with the URL. And in the get method, the URL size limits the length of the content that you can send. You can't send an infinite amount of information because the URL based on different browsers and servers, you have a limited number of characters for the URL. In that case, you are limited in terms of the information that you can pass on to the server. In the post method, it's like determined by the server. There is no character limitation in the form of URL constraints, but rather the information can be sent as a unit, as a bundle um, through the body of the request, right? Okay, so now you can see over here we have two files that needs to be created. The subscribe part, which happens to be a simple HTML file with forms, so you can get a sense of how the forms will look like. And basically, you have the sub handle part that basically handles the information that is being passed through the subscribe.html file, right? Okay, so let's see how we can do it, right? So let's take Notepad++, and let's create form. And when you create the form, there are a few attributes that we need to give. That first one is the name of the form. Here, it's not very much of importance, but anyways, we'll give. Let's call it form sub, right? And also, there is the attribute called method. Now, this defines how we are passing the information to the server. In this case, I'm going to use a get method, the get method, to basically send the information so that we can differentiate between how the get and post works, right? And also, now this is the most important part. We need to specify the action. By action, what it means is this information is actually getting passed to of another PHP file which we have not created yet called subhandle.php, right? So this is the handling part. This is where the information that is being passed from the subscribe HTML will be processed, and in this case, it's a simple output statement containing this particular message, right? Based on the information that we are sending it to it, right? So the action, so in this case, that happens to be sub underscore handle dot php. Let's do that. Sub handle dot php. Okay, so not saved it. Let's save it to the server. Okay, so I straight away went on to the same folder. So I've given you instructions on how to access it earlier on in my earlier videos. So here in this case, I'm gonna save it as subscribe.html, right? I'm gonna save it, replace it, fine. Now with the color coding and all of that, it makes things more convenient and clear. So this is my form tag, right? So it's actually a container tag. So we have a closing form tag as well. Right, now inside this, between this, I'm going to include my content here. Now here what I have is a simple name and email. So if I go to the interface again, so we have a name which has to accept the name of the user, and then an email which has to accept the email of the user, and then there's a button that allows me to send this information to the server, right? So let's do that. So name, I'm going to break it to the next slide and say now this one is a simple input text element. Input type equals text. Now it's definitely required that you give a name to it, because when you pass the information to the server, you can't simply sort of refer to a particular, I mean, there are two data input elements in this, right? So you have to have a name to refer to this, right? So name in the sense like there should be a calling name. For example, in this case, since we're talking about the name here, I can just give something like NA, right? So NA, whatever the values that are being sent through the text box related to the name will be called by the variable name called NA, right? So we'll get to see that through the URL in a moment. So the name is called NA, and you can have a placeholder if you want to, saying, right, say enter name, some information, right? So it's a non-container tag, so you can close it there and then finish it off, and then something similar. Now the second one happens to be an email, right? Now when the type is set to an email, you know, in HTML5 elements, it requires a certain format. It requires that symbol to be entered, something like that, and we need to give a different name. Let's say EM, just to say it's the email. Enter, let's say email, right? So the placeholder is simply displaying some text um, within the elements. Here we need to give we didn't give the email label, and then also today what we need to do is now if we just go along with this, the lines or these input fields and all of the text will be in the same line. So we need to break it off. We are dealing with HTML here, and also another break tag over here as well. And at the end of it, we can put the button, the submit button. That basically, once you press the submit button, it will send the information to the web page or the script that is mentioned by the action in the form element, right? Okay, so input type equals to submit, right? And you can have a value as well. The value is simply the text that is displayed on the button. So here in this case, it needs to be sign me up with an exclamation mark. Let's do that. Okay. The name can be given as well. Let's go for submit again. It's not that much of an importance here. Right, so we're done with this. Let's try to see how it looks like. I'm going to save this. I'm going to access my okay, local host. So is it running? Let's see. Yes. So if you don't have this particular thing, that means your web server is not running. So you go to the control panel, XAMPP, and basically check whether your web server is running. Currently mine is running, so exit this, and then the folder you might be able to recall ICT class. Inside the ICT class, okay, it's not within the dashboard. Inside ICT class, this happens to be subscribe.html. So I'm going to go along with that. Now you can see this is the interface that I've created. So these are the placeholders. You can see enter name and enter email. So now you can type in some information here. Something like this. Right now, the thing is, like when you press this button, let's see how it works out. It sort of sends the information to another file, which is not existing at the moment. You can see subhandle.php. But the most important thing over here is where you can see that there are some parameters. I'm going to just copy this for the convenience of understanding it. I'm going to break it off. Now this is my URL that was being passed. Now up to this point, it's basically the same. This is basically my folder, my location, and sub_handle.php was the action that I had stated, that I had specified in my form, right? So, but afterwards, it was followed by the question mark and some other string. So this is your query string. I've broken it off into the next line. So this is your query string, okay? Yeah, I can see today, if I break it off using the ands, right? You can see over here, NA equals to Kasum, right? NA happens to be the name of the text input field, for the name, right? And then the value that I entered inside that was Hasun. And then em was the email field, and it was having this .com. So this percentile 40 refers to the character at symbol. And then also we're passing the information now, since we had another value and name for the button itself. It's being passed as well. So this is something important that we'll be taking into account later on. For the time being, we're not gonna use info. This is how it works out, right? So this is the information that is being passed today. Now we need to create that the handling script. Let's close this. Right. So the script that we are about to create is something called sub_handle.php. So take the notepad again. So for the sake of convenience, I'm just gonna copy this over here so that I can refer to it later on. So I'm gonna just simply save it as sub_handle.php. And just to make things like, I don't need this to be in the form of a like another form here, but I just want to refer to this information later on. So I'm gonna just simply comment it out using HTML commenting method, right? So this is all commented out, right? They don't have any impact on the output. So this is what I have, right? Now about the PHP script. Now I can start the PHP parts as usual. PHP, and let's go down with this. Okay, if you're hearing like sort of a announcement going on, that's how things are nowadays. Don't worry about it. Right, so we have the PHP script started. Now what we need to do is like now if you are to like there are blanks for you to fill these in today. So you can sort of refer to the previous one, or else the green color part over here. You can write it down onto page number 11. That is where the subscribe.html part is. And then on the page number 12, we have sub_handle.php. There, what I need you all to do write down is the only the PHP part, this part, right? So whatever that is after line number 9, you need to write it down, right? Okay, now here what I do, okay, this is the interesting part. Now we're gonna accept the information that is being passed from the subscribe.html file, right? So through this particular web page, what I'm doing is I'm passing some information. It's like, just imagine a ball being passed on to someone else. So this guy, the sub handle, needs to catch it. You need to fetch it. You need to bring it in, right? So how do you do that? It's you might recall that we talked about some super global variables earlier on, right? Now, by like automatically, what happens is when you pass an information to a script, the information will be saved in super global variable, like using sort of an associative manner, right? Let's see what that is. So here what I'm doing is this. I'm gonna sort of catch them, take them, and then substitute them into local variables, right? Okay, this is what I meant by that. So I'm gonna say there's a variable called $name, right? Simple enough. I'm creating a variable called $name, right? A name. So the name equals to what? The information that was passed from the HTML file. So how do I mention that? It's like this. I say $_, right? Since we are using the get method in this, I'm going to say get, right? And inside the get method today, I am referring to the name field. So I'm using the variable name, or else the field name, the name that I applied to the field called name, that is NA. So that refers to this, or else if I go to the page itself, this one, right? So this is your NA, right? So this, the value that I'm simply passing is basically sent to the script, and then I can catch it using this particular statement, right? Now, just to check whether we got it right, we can simply echo it and see. Echo, since we have taken it onto a local variable, we'll just refer to that $name. Okay, and see, I'm gonna save this. Okay, and then move back here. Okay, I'm okay with this one. So I didn't do any changes to this page. I don't need to refresh it. So I'm gonna depend on the values that are already here. I'm gonna press the button. Okay, so it sort of displays the variable name. In this case, the text that I've passed through the NA field onto the PHP script, and it displays as custom, right? So that's good enough for me. And then you can do the same for the other one as well. I'm just gonna remove this. So the next one would be the email, and you might recall the name that I passed to that or gave that particular field was EM, right? Now both of my fields or the information that I have passed from the previous HTML document have been captured onto local variables. I'm going to refer to them and try to construct the output according to my requirement. So the requirement is I need to say hi and then the name of it, the person that was sent, and then you will receive updates on, and then whatever the email address that was sent, right? So that's my output. So I'm going to start with an echo statement. Echo, say hi, followed by the $name, because yeah, and I can break it off as well. And another echo statement. So here what it does is it says hi followed by the name of the person that was sent. So this is simply the same variable, and that is now holding the value that was sent from the HTML document. And say okay, says you will receive updates on. Okay, right. And I'm gonna break it off as well. Okay, and yeah, the email. Right. So let's see how it works out. I'm gonna save it. Okay, so let's go for a different name. Say Shyam.j. Okay. Right. So the information was passed, and you can see hi followed by the name, right? And then you will receive updates on, and followed by the email address. Okay. So that's a simple method of passing information to the server, and that's how the thing was done, right? So for the time being, let me just since we want to have some idea about how the information is actually passed, I'm gonna go to the XAMPP control panel and go to the log of Apache. Right, you get a lot of information here. that was basically passed into it. And I'm gonna go to the bottommost record, and I'm just gonna copy this. Let's take a new notepad, paste it. Okay. So this one basically is similar to, now you might recall the loopback address that I taught you a couple of times. So that was 127.0.0.1, which is equal to localhost, if you're referring to an alphanumeric representation. And then this is also related to, or else it sort of refers to this as well, right? So this is basically the IPv6 version of what you call the loopback address, right? This is exactly the same as 127.0.0.1, right? So that means it's from the local server, right? These two dashes refers to the username and something like that. And then you can see the date and the time. So it's called the timestamp of the request. You can see today I'm using the get, right? Now this is what the server gets, right? So it, some information that the server keeps as a log, right? This person sent me the information, and then this is like, you know, how if it is an error, it keeps another separate error log as well. This is the access log, right? So from the local server, it sort of follows on localhost ICT class sub handle PHP, and now you can see this is what I meant by the request URL, right? So in the URL, you can see the part that I have sent. I mean, we saw that earlier from the actual URL as well. You know, this is the from the point of the web server, right? So this information is being passed, right? And then this percentile 21 refers to the exclamation mark, right? So it's a symbol. And then this is the HTTP version that I'm using. 200 means it's an OK response. That means I think it's asking it to cater to the okay. The information was properly received, something like that. I've given you the response codes as well. Like, you know, if it is starting from 4, that means it's a client side error. If it is starting from 5, it's a server side error, something like that, right? And then 340 means the amount of content that is requested, something like that. And there are some web browser related information that is being passed as well, right? Understand, right? So then basically this is the sender, this is the web browser information. So this is somewhat, it's not the request itself, but you don't see the body of the request. But essentially this is something like the request. This is a log that is kept by maintained by the web server. Okay, right. I don't need it. Fine. So moving on to the next part, that would be passing data to the same script, right? Now, if you are interested in, say, for example, you might be able to create something like even a calculate event. Just, you know, send 2 information in and then 2 numbers. And basically, the operator can be selected as well, maybe from a drop-down menu or something. And then the information is being accepted from the script, and then you can basically compile the script. We'll do something like that later on. You can do that as well, right? So it's basically you know, what you can think of, like, you know, you can try that out once the session is done. Like, y'all can basically sort of, you know, do your own stuff, right? You know, what you simply did with Python and all that. I mean, you can do here with this language as well. Now, the next part is about passing the data to the same script, right? Okay, so that is like, rather than having the information like the requesting document here in the earlier case was the subscribe.html, and the responding script was subhandle.php. So why can't we have both of this on the same page, right? Same file. We can do that, right? Sort of calling to itself, right, for the response. So the programming part as well as the interface part, but right, basically should both the parts should basically exist in the same file, right? So how do we do that? There's a thing called isset. So let's deal with that later on. Let's see why that is required. But for the time being, with our own knowledge, what we have, let's try to deal with that, shall we? So let's take a new file. Now I'm basically referring to the example, the last part of page number 12. You can see there's a button called click me, and then basically it says click. So the example says create a submit button and display clicked when it's clicked, right? So it's simple enough. Let's create a form anyhow. Form, say action equals. Now this is something important. Now we need to make the action the same file name, in the sense like now if say let's save this up front. Let's call it yeah, click me dot since we are integrating PHP coding as well, I'm going to say PHP, click me dot PHP, save it. And the action should basically refer to the same script. So we're calling ourselves, sort of, right? Click me dot PHP, and the method equals to, let's go with post. Okay. Do we need a name for this? I will go ahead and put that. Form click. Okay, as I've told you, it's a container tag. Inside the form, I'm going to simply have a submit button. Input type submit. And I'm going to give a name to this. I'll call it submit itself. Okay. Let's change the name. The submit button, sub button, and then the value is what is displayed on the button itself. It's click me. Okay. That's it. So we don't have any other components within our form. It's just a simple button. We do need the form element, otherwise, like the action part, the calling body, all of that cannot be specified. So so you have your input button or the submit button within the form. So in terms of the interface, whether we're done, I'm gonna save this again, and then let's call it and see. So it's clickme.php. Yeah, so we have a button, and then it sort of comes back to this. No change of the URL because it's sort of like sort of coming back to the same script. So what I need is, now initially when you load the page, it shouldn't say anything, but when you click on this, it should say click, right? So that's my intention. So I've not done the PHP scripting part yet. Let's do that. So it's on the same file over there, no separate file here. Right, now what I do is, okay, now I'm going to use an if condition saying if the button is clicked. When you click a button today, in this case, the button is called submit, sub button. So when you press on a button, you might be able to recall in the earlier case, we passed an information to the server, right? The information that was passed was the value of that button. Basically, the label name or the name that was displayed on the button itself was basically passed on to the server. That means there is a value in the for the button variable as well. So the button variable happens to be sub button. Now you can use that to check whether there is a value for the variable called sub button, right? So you can say if conditions, the condition needs to be within brackets always, keep that in mind, unlike in Python. If sub button, so we're passing information to this using the post method today, keep that in mind. So here what we need to do is if $_post, okay, forgot the PHP part, right? If $_post, the only element that I have that can carry a value in this case is the sub button, right? Now what it does is, now sub button is actually containing a string value called click me, but here what I'm asking, if there is a value for the button element, or in this case this particular variable, right? And I would say echo clicked. Okay, that's it. We don't need to be concerned about the else part. We'll just go along with this, and then if you want, you can do that as well. Else echo not clicked. Okay, so yeah, and we're done with that, and then we can basically close the PHP part. So essentially, again, I'll brief you through what I've done here. So I have the form created, and the button was given a name called sub button, and the value was click me. Now, whenever the user presses the button, it will pass that information to the server, right? What information is being passed? The value of it, basically click me, right? So I can just right, I can just echo that as well. I'm just gonna okay, make all of this the comment. I'm gonna use a multi-line comment, so nothing will be executed. It's practically invisible to the server, and I'm just gonna say echo, right? $_post sub button. Okay, so technically speaking, it shouldn't display anything upfront, but when I click on the button, it should say click me, right? Rather than clicked or not clicked or something like that. Click me happens to be the name of the button, right? So the value that is being displayed on the button. So let's run it and see. We already have the script with us, and then we'll refresh. Okay, just see what happens, okay? Right, because it was already clicked earlier on, it says click me, right? But suppose if I just okay, take this off into a new tab and click. So that's when this is the initial state of this fully. So anyways, like here what happens is, you can see I have not clicked on the button. Now it gives me an error, right? So what does that error say? Undefined index sub button. So they say they do not recognize the value sub button, right? So that means, so on line number 7, let's go to the line number 7 and see. Okay, this is the problem statement, right? They say that they cannot recognize the index called sub button. It's rightfully so over there because we have not clicked on it yet. So there is no value that is being passed in the form of a name or the value itself click me, right? So therefore, PHP, this particular script, it's running, right? So it's running and it doesn't have any idea about what sub button is. So it's having a problem and then it's, as a result, it generates an error and then gives it to the user. But when I click on this, right, now the value is being passed, right? The value is passed to the script, right? Now it recognizes that there is a variable called sub button and it sort of passes the information click me onto that. Now this is what basically prints. Click me is being printed because of the echo statement. So as a result, you get this, right? So this is not what we want actually. So we want the program to run smoothly, even if at the beginning state of the program, right? So the script needs to run perfectly well. And how do we do that, right? Okay, this is where the isset part comes in. Now I'll just basically get rid of this. And as a result, you will probably see almost the same thing. Now, what happens is it will check whether the sub button is initialized, right? That means is there a value assigned to it? And then if so, it will say clicked. If that is not the case, it will say not clicked, right? So here again, since I'm okay, it says undefined index sub button. Again, the same problem because the button has not been clicked. So as a result, the PHP script doesn't know the existence of a variable called sub button. So it has a problem trying to define it. And then since by default the condition is false in nature, it says not clicked, right? But if I click on this, it says clicked, right? Now, how to get rid of that error in the initial script? That is where the isset comes in, right? Now, rather than saying, to check whether the value of the sub button exists, we say if isset this particular value, right? Now, what does the isset do? It simply checks whether there is a variable that is passing that information, whatever the information is there, like whether that variable exists, and then if the variable exists, it will basically take that value into account and do the needful, right? So let's try this, and then let's move on to a simple example how the isset actually works, right? Okay, let's run it and see. Save it. I'm gonna take a new tab. Okay, so this is the initial thing. This is how it started, right? So earlier on, you might recall that we had an error, right? Saying that there is no such variable called sub button. So it didn't know how to tackle that in the sense like how to process that, and it sort of gave us an error. But now it's not, right? It's basically saying, okay, the user has not clicked on this. So if I click on that, it says clicked. Okay, so this is basically there whenever you are passing information onto the same script, right? So to get rid of that error related to the variables, the script that is not being able to recognize the variables upfront, you can use the isset command, right? It's a function. And if I use the same function on a simplest, say, example, now, basically speaking, you all can basically like copy the script down. This is what needs to be copied down onto page number 12 as the answer, right? So let's go for a simple example and see how it works out, right? So let's take a new file. Okay, let's just keep it PHP only, just to get an idea about this. I'm gonna save it as isset test. Okay, so now what I have is a simple PHP script. Now let's say that we have a variable called x. Okay, let's say x is equal to 5. Right, simple enough. Now let's say echo. If I say $x, right, which is called isset test. It says 5, right? Rightfully so. Not a big deal. So x is equal to 5. $x simply means it's referring to the same value. And as a result, you get 5 as your answer. But if I say echo isset x, right? Now, if that is the case, then let's see how it sort of produces the output, right? If I refresh, it says 1, right? So this 1 doesn't imply the numerical 1, but rather it implies the Boolean one, in the sense like it's saying there is a value or the variable x is actually set, right? And as a result, you get this particular thing. Now, if I say, okay, let's go for something else. Okay, let's say I'm checking for the variable isset $y. If I save that and run, so there is no particular variable called y in my program, $y. But if I run that, it doesn't give me anything. So that means it's Boolean false or 0, or in this case, nothing at all. Understand? So this is basically checking whether a variable is set, right? A variable has already initialized and gotten a value. If that is the case, then isset produces a Boolean one, that means true in nature. And then basically, if it is not, it doesn't say anything. So that means it's basically Boolean false. So just for the sake of, let's see, I mean, if this is producing an output, let's assign that to another variable called, let's say, a. $a equals to, sorry, equals to isset $x. Okay, now isset is basically producing an answer. So it's for, like, from what we have understood, it happens to be something like in the Boolean in nature. And if I say, okay, $a, and then if I print, I might recall something called, okay, let's print it, something called var dump, right? Var dump basically was used to understand what variables were, what type it is, and then what information is being stored. So in this case, I'm going to try to understand what A is, right? Save it, run it. Okay. Now, this is what is being printed, var dump A. So A is holding, or it's actually in the type of Boolean, and it's currently true, right? Rightfully so, because it's referring to X, and X is holding a value. So it's sort of giving us true as an answer. So if I just change that to Y, which is a non-existing variable. If I refresh this, it gives me false because there is no such variable called y, and therefore the output of this is false. Understand, right? Now, if I refer back to, sorry, uh, if I refer back to my previous example, okay, let's try to understand, apply the same knowledge onto this. In the initial state today, there was no variable called subbutton, right? So because of the absence of this variable called subbutton, isset produced a false, right? If we are simply asking if false, right, then basically it will move on to the else statement and then print not linked, right? If there is a variable, once you click on the button, there will be a variable called subbutton initialized to some value, click me or whatever, right? And since there is a variable now, isset is producing bool true, a boolean value true. If it is true, then it will move on to the true statements in the if condition, and it will say clicked, right? So I know it's like for most of y'all, it's like a novelty, something brand new. But if you try to understand this, this is not very complicated. So I would suggest that you watch this part again and sort of get an idea about how things work out, and basically say try to practice this, right? Now we'll move on to something more complicated, not very complicated, but try to combine a few things what we have done. Let's make a new file. So that's that, right? So page number 11 and 12 covered. I just want to do one more example for your understanding. Let's try to create a calculator, right? It's not much, but with the knowledge that we have, the operators and all of that, let's try to create one. So here it's going to use the isset function. We're going to use that, and basically say pass two values, and then based on the operator, we can sort of do addition, subtraction, likewise. So let's create the form part first. Form action is the same file. Let's call it calc.php. I'm going to save it by that name. And then the method is post, and name, let's call it form calc. Form. I'm going to save this. Let's call it calc.php. Needs to be saved as calc.php because we're referring to the same file. So yeah, and I have two input fields. Okay, so let's do that. Say number one, input type. Now you might recall we have a field called number that only accepts numbers, numerical inputs. And we need to have a name for that. Let's call it num1. And placeholder, we don't need one, right? So yeah, name, and yeah, if you need to there, you can sort of give a size for this as well, but it's up to you to decide. And then basically I need to have a break statement. Copy this. Let's call it number 2 and num2 here. Okay, the two input fields are done. I'm going to do something not usually done. That is, I'm going to have 4 submit buttons, right? With obviously different values, and based on the value that is being passed, I'm going to do the different type of operators. It's like on a calculator, you have addition, subtraction, multiplication, division sort of buttons, right? So say I'm going to have input type equals submit. and name, I'm gonna have it as something like op, that stands for the operator, something like that. And then the value, I'm gonna have 4 different buttons, and this is basically that will be displayed on the button itself. I'm gonna just put add, right, the addition symbol. Okay, and then I'm gonna just simply okay. Since I need some spacing in between, I'm gonna have the unbreaking space, right? Let's just take 2 of them. And I copy the whole thing, paste it 3 more times. So only thing that will be different, I mean, you're clicking on one button at a time, so you won't have a problem of passing several values for the name. So it will be just one value. So that's what I'm hoping to achieve. Right? You can have a single button and then have a drop down operator as well. But this seems to be better, I think, or else an option button. Technically, this might be one of the worst ideas ever, but this might work, right? So okay, let's do that. And this fine. So I'll just run it and see. This is called calc.php. Okay. Okay, so looks good enough. So we have some buttons. It doesn't do anything because we have not done the script part yet. You can have, if I just typed, I'm just now typing on the letters, doesn't work. But you can have any numerical value, right? It works with that, right? So saves time on the validation part because it's one of the input fields given in HTML5. So if you want some more break statements, you can go along and do that as well. So this is my interface part, right? So now the PHP. Okay. Now now we are sort of accepting 2 inputs, right? 3 inputs rather, 2 numbers and the operator as well, right? So we need to accept all those information, but keep in mind, if you just go along accepting values through the $_post method or the super global variables, it will give errors for each of those values that are being accepted. Sorry, accepted because the variables may have not been set. Right now, the way that you do that is this. So you can have an if condition in place, very similar to the previous one. We can check whether the operator is set. That means one of the buttons have been clicked, right? So they are all containing the same name. Not a problem because on the interface you can't click 2 buttons at the same time, right? So therefore only one value will be passed to the variable called op, and then that variable will be captured and basically so you can do the processing whatever that is needful later on. Say isset. Okay, we can accept that value $_post with the operator op. Right, check whether there is a value, and if this whole thing is true, then basically we do all of the rest of it, right? So accept and assign those variables to local variables. Let's say $n1 equals to so the first one is num1 today. So the variable or the value that is being passed through the variable num1 will be captured and will be assigned to the local variable n1. So the same thing for the second value as well, num2. And basically we need the operator as well, right? I'm gonna call it itself and then this is the operator, right? So it's going to be a symbol, it's a character. So based on the type of character that we have, I'm gonna do the computations in different manner, right? So if it is an add, then you do the addition of the two numbers, likewise, so on and so forth. So I'm gonna use the switch case statements, right? Which we did in the selections part of PHP. So we can say switch. Now, for the sake of checking whether these are all fine and correct and all that, you can say echo and basically say dollar n1, dollar n2, and dollar op. See whether they work. I'm gonna save this, refresh. Line number 17. Okay, I didn't close the curly bracket. Okay, so let's go with 45, 56. I'm gonna change this, 96, and then I'm gonna do multiplication. Right, 45, the first number, second number, 96. Okay, and then the multiplication x, right? So seems like we are getting the information properly, so we can get rid of this. Now we can go with the switch statement. Switch, and the variable that we are comparing is the operator, right? So based on the value of the operator, if it is plus, then we do the addition likewise. So it's the operator that we are checking. We can say $op, and can open the curly braces for that. Okay, and then what we have inside are the cases, right? Say case. If the operator, now since this is simply a string value today, we can just go along with the, you don't need to put $up equals to something like that. You can just go along with we're simply comparing the operator variable plus. If it is plus, then what should we do? We can actually have another variable called the answer, just to hold on to the value. You can keep it as something like that. We don't need to, you can simply define it here as well. But anyhow, let's go along with that. $answer equals to $n1 plus $n2. And you might recall after each and every case statement today, we had to put the break statement. Otherwise, there was a tendency of all the other rest of the operations being carried out. So I'm going to have 4 of them. If it is minus, do the subtraction. If it is multiplication, that would be x. Now x doesn't work here. We need to put the asterisk. That would be the multiplication. Slash, a slash. Right, and yeah, so there aren't any other cases. You can say default and give something else, but here, like, only 4 buttons having 4 different labels only. And after that, after the computation is done, we need to give the answer back to the user in the form of an echo statement. Echo, I can say answer, and followed by $answer. Okay. So let's try whether this works out. Save it. Okay, so there's something going on there. Let's copy this, paste it. There is a misprint. Okay, over here. Right. Let's see how it works out. Let's go with something like 49, 7, and divide. Yeah, it gives us the answer. right? So something else, 56, 2 multiplication, okay. Okay, fine. Yeah. So things work out, it seems, and then you can basically go along and improve this according to your requirement as well. So this is the code for that. The first part happens to be the interface parts, and then we have the PHP part, the script that handle this. The most important part that you need to understand is the isset, right? So isset dollar post some particular variable means it checks whether that variable is set, right? That means is it defined? Is it containing something? If it doesn't, it simply says false. If it is, it simply says true. So based on that, since if condition is a Boolean condition, if it is true, we can do the rest of the statements there. If it is not set, then we can simply say, okay, this is the if condition part. So we can go along and say else, and simply say echo, and say please enter values and press a button, something like that. And let's see how it works out. This again. Okay, so since it is not set, none of these buttons were pressed. So the variable called op is not set. So therefore it says, please enter values and press a button. So can do that. And it gives me the answer, right? So this is if the values or the value or rather the operator op is not set. If it is so, if it is true, then do all of this. So that is basically how this thing works out. Okay.